We're super excited to introduce you all to Professor Jules White.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I'm a professor in computer science at Vanderbilt, and I am the director of Vanderbilt's initiative on the future of learning and generative AI. And so it's how do we make sure that Vanderbilt is a world leader in generative AI? And a big part of that is helping to make sure that we think through how to teach people how to solve problems with generative AI and how to use it effectively. And then I also work as an advisor to the chancellor on how do we build the generative AI infrastructure for the university.
So great to have you here. Really appreciate your time and your expertise. So as we're building and working with Copy.ai and generative AI tools, we want folks to be mindful of several things. One is it's becoming, coherent, but also it sometimes fails and makes factual mistakes. Is there some recommendations you have about how people can address this and become better at it?
Yeah, well, I think the starting point is to really understand what it does well and what it does not, what it's not intended to do. So a lot of people think of it like internet search, where you go and type in anything you want and you're going to get facts back or a source of truth back. And that's not really the best way to use it. In fact, if you go to it and you're putting in some type of thing that looks like what you would do on an internet search and expecting to get a result that's of the same level of, I would say groundedness in facts, you're probably going to be mistaken and not get something as good as you want. But that doesn't mean that it's not immensely valuable. The thing is you want to give it the information to reason on. That's the starting point I always say is that either you need to go and look at a task where it doesn't matter if it's perfectly right or wrong, something like brainstorming. That doesn't matter if it's perfect or not. The goal is to have a human being and help them think about the problem and whether or not their ideas are right or wrong. That comes out of the tool. If it gives them an idea that helps them become inspired to think deeper about something, that's really the point. And it's not about facts. It's about different perspectives. On the other hand, if you want facts, you need to give it facts and then ask it to reason with the facts that you've given it. And that's something they can do really well. And then there's lots of techniques that you can use to help make sure that the output that it's giving you is consistent with the facts that you gave it in. So a simple example is if you give it a set of facts and you want it to then reason with them and tell you about its conclusions, you want it to cite back to the facts that you gave it. So you can tell it, give me quotations from the information I gave you that support your reasoning. And then you can go and check if those quotations were in the information that you originally gave it. And if you go and look at a lot of the generative AI platforms that use internet search, they're actually doing something like that. They're going and getting, the top 10, for example, let's say, results from a search engine, feeding it into a prompt for the large language model, and then the large language model is basing its answer off of those search results. And so you want to do things like that to try to get more factually accurate things out. But I would say also don't underestimate the value of getting a different perspective or brainstorming, those types of things. I think that's underappreciated because we never had anything in computing that could go and say, what are other ways I could do this? That's a really, really hard question. And it's a really valuable question depending upon what problem you're trying to solve. If you're trying to do a really high value problem and you say, give me alternative approaches, and it gives you alternative approaches, well, it's given you really, really valuable output. And it doesn't matter if it's perfectly accurate or not, because you're trying to come up with ideas of how to solve the problem. And you still go and run them to ground and fact check them and investigate them and determine if they're feasible or not.
I learned so much from you, not just from this conversation, but from your course on Coursera. What I really enjoyed about that course, by the way, was one of your explanations on how to use this as a game generator. I thought that was such a great use of the abilities of the generative AI platform, how we deal with bias in the LLMs.
The starting point is the more information and context you give to the large language model, the better the output is going to be. And so if you go in and you just use it like internet search, basically what you're going to get is you're going to get an answer that mimics what you might have seen on the internet, which again, it's not necessarily factually accurate. It may have biases. It may have all kinds of problems. So the starting point I always say is you really want to give it the information that you want it to reason on. So you want to give it the unbiased information. You want to give it the additional rules that maybe it didn't learn or hasn't seen, all of these things that make it produce output that you're going to be able to rely on. Now, I think part of the problem is everybody still wants to use it like search. They want to use it like internet search. I think of it more as like a computing engine. It changes the way the things that we can do with information, but it's not necessarily the best thing to go and pull information out of because it's really hard to distinguish what is just pure hallucination and what is real. And so you want to start with sound, unbiased information going in, and then take the outputs of that. And you want to ask it to do the analysis in a way that you can take its output and go and look back at what you gave it and see is it aligned. You want to do things where you can check it for consistency with what you gave it and be in control of the information that's going into it. I think that's the starting point. I think the other thing to not underestimate is that, as humans, we're biased, right? And the bias in large language models comes from human bias that it learned. And so you have to pay attention to your own bias going into your prompts and other things. If you're giving it biased information, or you're not giving it enough information to where it's just going to go out and pull something that was in its training set that may or may not be, biased or not, you don't know. I mean, you're really not going to get the quality of answer you want. So start with the information and be in control of the information that you give it. Be careful in your prompts and how you word things and think about that. But one thing I think that is really missed is that one of the underappreciated powers of these tools is to help us as humans overcome our own bias. And I'll give you two examples of this. So as humans, we're really biased in like, I've solved this problem this way, over and over. So therefore, when I go to solve the problem, I'm going to solve it that same way because I'm biased because I understand that solution. So I don't look outside to other ways of overcoming the problem, other solutions, other middle grounds in a negotiation, because I can only see my perspective. And so one of the things that large language models are good is you can tell it, I want 5 different perspectives. I want 5 different solutions to this problem, and force yourself to look at alternative views. And I think that's one of the things that they're really, really valuable to is to force it to give you different opposing perspectives, and then you have to think about them. And I think that's a really, really valuable thing. Another thing is like, we have confirmation bias on data. We want to look at data and say it means this. But instead, ask it, okay, let's take this data. Now give me different possible, interpretations of that data. And the thing that's really nice about this is it forces you as the human to think deeper about what you're doing. You don't get to just say, that's what it is, and I'm going to move on. But whenever you get options, you're forced to think about those options. And a lot of times that can help us figure out where we were maybe biased and how we were thinking about something. Or maybe we can see something we just never saw, another perspective that we never saw before that helps us relate to someone better, solve a problem better, do those types of things. So I think, don't underestimate the value of having it give you options and you thinking about them to overcome your own biases in a lot of different areas.
So you're involved in education of next generation users of generative AI, and also the people that are going to be forming the future direction of these tools. What is your perspective on that? And how do you address something like educating people about something we don't know where it's going yet?
Well, I think we start off by teaching people what we know now and what are the possibilities. And I think we start with the things that it can do that we've never really been able to do in computing. A great example of this is like we were just talking about getting different perspectives. But getting perspectives, a lot of people want to drill down to very specific sort of simple problems, like rewrite this email for me. But where it really gets interesting is when you start thinking about like, why am I writing the email in the first place? What do I want to say? What are the ideas? Like, who should I be emailing? Like when you start moving up the chain in terms of the thought, that's where I think a lot of the really interesting applications of large language models is helping humans to analyze problems better, think better, those types of things. And I don't think those use cases are going to go away as the large language models change. Now, we may have lots of, details that change, but the idea of having sort of like I have a collaborator, Bob Higgins, who's a CEO, and he describes it as his private thought partner. Having that thought partner that you can go and sort of, take an idea and go back and forth on it and look at it from different angles and try to solve it in a different way. That's something that's just a fundamentally new capability that we didn't have. We had the ability to do that with other humans, but you had to have somebody there to be your collaborator who had the time, who was willing to do it. And this is LLMs are like that collaborator that's always around, willing to talk about anything, brainstorm about anything with you at any time. And so teaching people to use it in that way as a starting point, I think, is a really, really helpful thing. Um, I think it also requires people to rethink how we approach and solve problems. A lot of what we've done is, really specific to the way that we do computing now. But LLMs, the large language models, are really like this new interface to computing. So when you go in and you give it a prompt, you're actually programming to a large degree. When you say, act as my assistant, extract a list of bullet points from this email, that's a program, right? And then you cut and paste the email in. You're running a program basically against it, but you're specifying it in natural language. And so we have a new way of programming that's like that. But we also have tools where, previously the way that we interacted with computing was you went in and whatever buttons the programmer had put in place, that was what you were limited to interacting with. And if they hadn't built in the feature that you wanted, that's too bad. You just don't get to use it. You don't have that feature in the software. Or if you were a programmer, you could go program whatever you wanted, but it was really expensive and time consuming to do it. And LLMs are kind of this new interface to computing where you can go and say, I want to do this thing. And it doesn't have to be pre-programmed, and it can sort of figure out how to make that happen from a computing perspective. So that changes what we can do. We can be much more flexible in how we go and use computing to solve problems. And most users have been stuck with like these GUIs that are very limited or confusing or complex. And so people have to realize that now they are free to go and explore so many different angles and try so many different things, and they don't have to feel bounded like they were in the past. And so getting people in that mentality of thinking of like, let me try something, let me do something. Before, you didn't get to try. It was either there or it wasn't. Now you can try it and you can experiment. And so getting people into that mentality of like, let's try it. Let's imagine the feature I would like and see if it can do it. And getting through that, I think that's going to be another really important thing that we need to teach people. Now, a lot of the details, I'm sure a lot of these things are going to be changing over time, but I really think of it, it's a sort of higher level paradigms. I teach it in my classes in terms of patterns and thinking about patterns. Some people talk about it in terms of like, how do you problem solve, or the types of things. I think of them patterns as essentially, building blocks that you can teach somebody and how they interact with a large language model, that then they can go off and figure out how to apply it in their domain or wherever their area of expertise is. And then use that building block, but they can customize it and put them together in different ways. So I started off as a visual art major as an undergraduate, and then I moved into East Asian studies, and then I was in computer science. And the reason I got into computer science was because my roommate freshman year was taking computer science classes, and I saw his assignments and I thought they looked like fun. So I started doing them for fun, even though I wasn't in the class. And then eventually I realized, oh, I should take some of these classes because I think the assignments are fun. And then I ended up majoring in it. Um, but I've always kind of, I've always done art. I've always viewed things from that perspective of like, I like building and creating. And to me, the large language models are like this totally new artistic medium. Somebody dreamed up something that's so different and new and gives you such freedom for how you express yourself and what you can go and create. I think if it's like this fascinating new medium to go and build and create and do things with. The other way I describe it is I always say, my last year has felt like I was in a science fiction movie where they have that team of scientists who's in Area 51 or whatever secret military bases, and they get to go explore the new spacecraft and discover all of its technology and see what it can do. And this feels a little bit like that, because although we understand how they were built, roughly, and how they were trained, what all they can do is really still so much unknown, and how we can use them to solve problems in new ways is totally unknown. And we're at the very, very beginning of that. And so it's really exciting to me. So I'm excited, just from seeing all of the things that are rapidly happening and how people are using them. And, people tell me things all the time that are just completely new ways that I hadn't thought of using them. A simple one was I was talking to a lawyer in Copenhagen, and she's the in-house counsel for a startup company, and she was saying, I use it on a weekly basis in negotiation. I will take their position in the negotiation, I will take our position in the negotiation, and I'll say generate potential middle grounds for the negotiation.
Wow.
That's fascinating. Like say that's a fascinating use case. And then I learned from collaborators in investment banking, they were saying, okay, well, we want to take our deal documents and we want to have it question our assumptions and challenge us on our assumptions. And I thought, well, as a faculty member, I can take my slides before I go give a presentation and ask it to identify my assumptions and generate hard questions for me that challenge my perspective. And those types of things where you begin like, thinking differently, like a lot of people are like, well, it allows you to turn your brain off. And that's if you use it in the wrong way, right? If you use it in the right way, you turn your brain on, like you learn by using it. And so those things are really exciting to me to go and explore all these new potentials, but also the potential for using it as like augmented intelligence rather than artificial intelligence, where it augments me and amplifies my native sort of intelligence, problem solving, creativity, and like creates this like exoskeleton for the mind. I put that on and I can do things I couldn't do before. And so that's what gets me really excited.
Well, this conversation got me really excited. I'm thrilled to have your input to our community. And
Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, happy to come on anytime. And I really
thank
appreciate
you.
it.